The new edition of Lord of the Rings Warhammer is taking the world by storm, but the latest update to the Middle-earth strategy battle game has not been without its casualties. One of the biggest changes between editions is how players build their armies, and one of my most beloved forces that I have spent countless hours right here on the channel building is now on the chopping block. As I'm filming this, the new edition is just 2 weeks away, and I am faced with two choices. Do I abandon my beloved army and cast it into the proverbial fire, relegated forevermore to the shelf of shame, or do I ride out and meet the new edition for wrath, for ruin, and the world's ending? And as I'm standing literally in the middle of Rohan, just a few kilometers down from the Edoras filming location, I think you guys might know the answer.
In the last two editions of the Middle-earth strategy battle game, or Mesbugger, players would create their armies from a wide range of army lists depicting different factions from the world of Middle-earth. These forces could then be joined together using the alliance matrix. Different factions would lose certain bonuses if their union wasn't considered particularly themey, or even gain harsh penalties if the matchup was considered downright nonsensical. In the last edition, this concept was appended by a brand new way of building an army. The concept of the Legendary Legion was introduced with the Gondor War supplement in 2019, which allowed players to field an army from a very reduced roster of models built around a specific thematic event from Middle-earth. This custom Legion would also gain access to a range of special rules, sometimes a bonus or a penalty, to enhance the list and reward the player for making such a themey choice. For many years, my main army was one of these Legendary Legions, the Riders of Theoden, which focused on the Rohan host charging the fields of the Pelennor. I may even be so bold as to apportion a good deal of blame to myself for getting it nerfed several times over the years, as I covered a particularly powerful build using this legion quite a lot on the channel.
But across last edition, I also fell in love with a whole range of armies that were built using the alliance matrix. I am probably the most extreme example of a pro-alliance matrix player. One of my favorite things about the strategy battle game is building all sorts of wacky representations using different army lists to thematically represent entire other concepts and get really creative with my list building. But as it looks like the alliance matrix is on the way out, my beautiful army, which became the staple, my main army that replaced Riders of Theoden, is officially dead in this next edition. Games Workshop has killed it. For match play, at least.
I am of course talking about the host of Thengel, which is a Rohan Gondor fiefdoms alliance where all of the profiles are proxying heroes from 50 years before the War of the Ring, when young Aragorn fought alongside Rohan. I absolutely adore this army. It's full of intensely themed conversions, and I put a huge amount of thought into adapting the existing rules and profiles to find a way to bring this wacky theme to the table in a tournament legal way, and I have had a huge amount of fun with it.
So am I enraged at this murder of my most beloved army? No, absolutely not. The way that I write army lists is just at the absolute periphery of most players' experience in the Middle-earth strategy battle game, and it shouldn't really be sort of taken into account from a games design perspective. But I was really jarred when I learnt about the changes in this whole kind of new army building format. But as I've sat with it, I'm not so convinced it's terrible. I think it's got some real scope and some potentially really positive impacts for the game. I'm going to unpack all my thoughts on this a little bit later in the video, because there might even be a way to bring the host of Thengel back from the dead.
So today we're going on a wild hobby journey through time to get my glorious army fully finished for one last tournament in the old edition of Middle-earth, before we decide to reforge it upon the anvil of the new edition, or let Games Workshop cast the soil upon its grave. First, let's jump back in time to December of 2020, 5 years ago, when this project began. In the year 2960 of the Third Age, nearly 60 years before the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Thengel, sire of Theoden, has been king of Rohan for 7 years. His western borders have been invaded by a host of Dunlendings, and he has summoned the Rohirrim to meet them upon the field of battle. But amongst the summoned marshals and lords comes a man unlooked for, Thorongil of the North. A mysterious man with the air of a great lord and a mighty general whose tactical prowess spares many lives and leads to a swift and resounding victory. But rather than return to the halls of Meduseld where fame and fortune await him, Thorongil takes his leave of Thengel and journeys south. In time, he would return to Rohan, but not for many years, and under his true name, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, and King Elessar. Brace yourself to see hundreds of dollars worth of kits and rare models getting butchered into some of the silliest Rohan conversions you've ever seen. So our first conversion was of course Thorongil himself, using the plastic Éomer as our base. As Aragorn is riding with the Rohirrim, it makes sense that he would don their garb of war, so Éomer's mail is a suitable fit, and the amazing dynamic pose of this model rearing up on the horse is perfect for the big centerpiece of this army. With the torso in place, it's time to arm this mighty warrior. The shards of Narsil at this point have not yet been reforged into Anduril, so he carries a simple arming sword in the style of a ranger from the north, pinched from the old metal Aragorn from the 2003 box set Heroes of the West. To really show that this model is Thorongil, I wanted to include the shards of Narsil, so I decided to have them in a scabbard slung at his waist. I grabbed a spare metal King Elessar model I've been saving for a rainy day, and snapped off Anduril and filed away Aragorn's hand, and glued that to where Éomer's Rohan scabbard should go, and with a little green stuff, widened the blade to become a sheath for Narsil. I then pinned the head from the old foot Aragorn and added a cape from the plastic Easterling Cataphract box, and blended that all into Éomer's shoulders, sculpting a hood at the same time to really hint at that Ranger of the North aesthetic. For the Thorongil dismount, I started once again with the plastic Éomer, but this time paired it up with Aragorn's ancestor, injured Isildur, grabbing both the head and arm from the shards of Narsil, and then added an undersized glamdring from the plastic Gandalf. If Aragorn does get knocked off his horse and we need this dismount, he's now ready to dual wield and stab some Dunlendings with his secret family heirloom. With Thorongil complete, it's time to begin on the Rohan heroes serving under King Thengel, and up first is another kooky conversion, starting with the previously unreleased bannerless Gamling model. This lovely sculpt will be representing none other than Forbold, father of Grimbold and lord of Grimslade, and you will notice that he has a horse! And we'll be adding some other interesting war gear as well. I did away with the sword arm and instead replaced it with a right shoulder and arm from a normal royal guard, and added a throwing spear from plastic Éomer. Forbold has been run over the last 5 years using the forlong profile from fiefdom, so I need to match that profile's war gear, so the throwing spear was perfect for Forlong's war spear, and then he needs to have a war horn. The Helminger's command was the perfect starting point for the dismounted Forbold. I just clipped off the axe and drilled out the hand, and then equipped him with a second throwing spear from the plastic Éomer kit, and to complete the match to the Gamling model, I sculpted a Royal Guard horsehair plume on the helmet, which looks identical to the helmet that is mounted to Gamling's saddle. Then I sculpted a horn out of green stuff on the mounted Forbold. I was so happy with these two conversions back in 2020, and they are still some of my favorite models I've ever made. The next character that went under the knife was Fastred, sire of Dunhir, Lord of Harrowdale. I wanted to keep finding these ways to make the heroes look really unique, to represent the different regions of Rohan they hail from, so here I started with a son of Ale. These worked perfectly as I needed an armored horse to match his profile because he's represented by a Knight of Dol Amroth in Forlong's warband. I then decided to give him Éomer's helmet from the new plastic kit, but instead of just doing a head swap, I used the helmet tucked under the left arm, which just created such a badass looking pose. I trimmed away the left arm of the Son of Ale with my clippers and mounted Éomer's arm, and then resculpted the cloak flapping in the breeze to cover the join between the plastic and the metal. I found another Royal Guard arm in the bits box, missing a hand, and mounted that to his right shoulder socket, and then brought in an old lance from a 2003 metal Knight of Gondor, who himself will appear very shortly, to perfectly match the Knight of Dol Amroth profile. Now, with the army coming along nicely, we are still missing one critical ingredient to ride to war at the tournament next week, because nothing feels better to any wargamer than a bucket load of army-themed dice. Every time I go to an event lately, all I'm seeing is gorgeous dice sets from Baron of Dice, so when the Baron himself reached out to help me kit up for a whole host of wargaming to come in 2025, I jumped at the chance.
Baron of Dice strive to create the best dice in the world, and you can literally feel the difference in your hand as you hold them.
Their hand-swirled resin dice are heavier, bubble-free, and precision engraved to deliver superior quality, balance, and detail. There's just no rival. Each design is crafted with the amazing tabletop wargaming community in mind. There is a huge range of art styles and designs available, so you'll easily find something perfect to suit your army. I got the Baron to just send me a boatload of different sets, so I could have fun mixing and matching sets for my forces and kitting out my tournament toolkit with gorgeous shiny new dice.
Baron of Dice also make a full range of accessories, dice cups, dice trays, playmats, deck boxes, and even a full range of RPG dice.
But of course, we need to give these beasts a test, and I could not resist a big charge down the causeway of Helm's Deep with Theoden Aragorn and gambling through a horde of Uruks, and the dice were just gorgeous to use.
So if you want to get some premium quality dice for all your wargaming needs, check out Baron of Dice, link down in the description, and use code ZORP at checkout for a sweet little discount, and a huge thank you to Baron of Dice for sponsoring today's video.
Up next, I had two Rangers of the North who are accompanying Aragorn, but I decided to lean into more of an armored aesthetic than their normal models to represent they've donned some gear of war and they're riding with their kinsmen as his bodyguards. So I'm actually going to use Citadel Guard from Gondor as my starting point. For the legs of the first mounted ranger, I cut down a metal Knight of Gondor and pried open his legs to perfectly fit the saddle of the metal Easterling Cataphract horse. And next we need our top half, so I chose the pose of a Citadel Guard which had just loosed an arrow, as it's a nice easy cut with the razor saw. I pinned those two halves together at the spine and locked them in place with some super glue, leaving a small gap to get the height and proportions correct, and then filled all that with green stuff, and then sculpted the rest of the cloak with green stuff, helping to cover that join, and then added a little hood to tie into the ranger aesthetic. With the mounted version done, I simply added a hood to another foot Citadel Guard for the dismount and sculpted a tiny star to pin both of their cloaks about their necks. The next hero represents Halbarad in his youth, so I decided to use the Beregond model for the dismount, as the face is just so full of character, and I added a hood and a star, and then for his mounted counterpart, he has donned a helmet and begins life as another Knight of Minas Tirith. To match the war gear, we need a sword and a bow, so I picked a pose that has his left hand holding the reins in a fist away from the horse, and then drilled out the hand and slotted in a bow from a plastic warrior of Minas Tirith. Then in his lance hand, I added a metal sword from the bits box. Now that was as far as I got back in 2020, and I began to run the army at events, scoring a bunch of really solid placings in Queensland and having a huge amount of fun. But then in 2022, before the move to New Zealand, I hiked all the way out to Edoras on a trip for their second big video on the channel.
Leap of faith! Yay!
On the site of the filming location, I knocked up a display board and then tried to finally paint young Aragorn, but it was a futile prospect in the fierce wind. And then I ran them at the New Zealand League final, but sadly, after finishing day one within reach of the podium, I completely lost my voice and I couldn't attend day two as I was filming with Weta Workshop the Monday after, and I needed my voice for this madness.
Wow, just wow. So I've unpacked the army and sorted it all out, matched up which metal horse goes with which rider, and I thought these were a lot better painted than this. I mean, I did these in 2020, right? Some of these sculpts are painted ages ago, like my Theoden model, I think was from 2018. So, you know, your opinion on your own paintwork changes, I guess. This used to be like my best painted stuff, and now, like the new Aragorn, to be fair, he's the most recently painted, he's half done, we're gonna finish him today. He looks great. Some of the Royal Guard, not so much. So we've got a little bit of a job to do here. I found my old army list and my old little guide that I used to give to my opponents so they know what the hell they're playing against. And now we have a real choice. I've got an 800-point list to build. That's what the tournament is in November. I don't really know what to do. I've got a great list here, but that list doesn't have Beregond. He got dropped to swap in Dernhelm. I could put Beregond back in, but I'm gonna have to lose 2 Royal Guards, so I'm gonna go down to only 16 models. So I'm gonna have no board control. Beregond is also basically unpainted, which is more work to do, so, let's just get painting and we'll see what happens.
Before finishing off the big man himself, I decided to warm up by finally painting Thorbold. He needed a bunch of final details, some red and green cloth to start with. He has a gorgeous dual-sided cloak. It's red lined, but has the classic Rohan green on the outside, which I just love. I've got lots of two-tone red and green shields and red and green fabrics all through this army, but my old greens had dried up, so I had to experiment using some new Vallejo Air greens, and I got this awesome new color for it. I almost want to repaint all of the green in the army. A few little leather details and metal buckles, and then he was ready to ride to war. The next lad in dire need of some love is the generic Ranger of the North Citadel Guard conversion. The foot model is still just primed in silver, so he needed a green cloak similar to Thorbold, but I kept it a little more desaturated, closer to that green-grey for the Ranger vibe, and then all of his metal and leather armor with silvers and browns and black washes, and then leather straps, the bow, and his skin tone. I even busted out the fine-tipped Sharpie for his eye pupils.
A huge thank you to all of my Patreons. You guys keep this whole channel running. My next 10 Super Duper Zorptrons got their plaques up on the honor wall. Shout out to Josh, Jake, Roy, Andrew, Martin, McCrow, Imperatus, Jeremy, Christopher, and Richard. You guys are absolute legends. And our next two Mega Zorptron statues. Kingsreach got a gorgeous Space Marine Sergeant. He chose a marble finish, and Hark Manlin, a 30k Terminator with a Thunderhammer, again in a marble finish. A huge thank you to all of my patrons. If you would like to see your name on the Zorpazorp Patreon honor wall, on a banner, or your own plaque, or even a statue dedicated in your honor, go and check out the Patreon link down below, as well as a whole heap of other benefits that come with the tiers. But it keeps this place alive. It just means everything to me here at Zorpazorp.
After a few touch-ups on the mounted version, I'm absolutely stoked with how my Ranger has turned out, and now it's time for the Ranger leader, Aragorn himself. Now, I'd already painted the dismount completely, but I was really unhappy with the elven cloaks. But after messing around with all those Vallejo Air greens, I thought I'll just repaint using those, and so I wet blended a bunch of those desaturated greens and got a really lovely hue for Aragorn's cloak. Then it was time to get the mounted model looking as finished as the dismount, and there's one big layer left, really, all of the armor paneling. Now, this suit of armor is borrowed from the Rohan armory, so when I painted the dismount, I decided to make it look like the armor set was mismatched so that it was, haphazardly fitting Aragorn. So I've got some red and green leatherwork, but just like King Theoden's armor, it is made from leather embossing worked over the top of metal plate. So the armor first needs a coat in silver before the raised details need to be picked out in the leather colors. The greaves and the vambraces are red leather, which I use my classic Vallejo Scarlet Red and some little gory red highlights, and the chest plate is the same kind of green leather as Elfhelm or the cloaks, again leaving all of that silver in the recesses. Then to tie all those layers together, a big wash in Agrax Earthshade that helps build up the recess detail. It almost black lines the individual color layers, and it tints the metallic silver just into a touch of a kind of brassy space, which works really nicely within the rest of the metalwork. Then, after a bunch of leatherwork and buckles, Aragorn is ready to join the forces of Rohan. So then it was time to ride forth to glory one final time at the New Zealand Middle-earth League final. I was lucky enough to draw against 4 of my good mates across the tournament: Adam, Jack, Mikey, and the lovely Julia, as well as a new player for me, Kathleen. 5 wonderful games with some glorious charges through enemy shield walls and getting my model smushed a lot by big bloody monsters. The highlight was losing 600 points before the end of the very first turn of the tournament when I set up a defensive formation around a Ranger of the North instead of Aragorn because they looked vaguely similar from behind. You'd think after 3 years of converting and playing this army, I would know my own models. Classic Lockie.
Even after that horrific start to the tournament, I still managed to ride to glory with the host of Thengel and claw myself back into the top 10, which I think was a pretty decent result. I had an absolute blast running them as a goodbye to the last edition, and the new edition is well and truly here now. I'm filming this in January, and Allies, the Matrix, Legendary Legions, it's all been blown apart, and the army building has just been replaced with fixed, static army lists which can't be allied or joined together in any way that are themed pinned tightly around specific moments from the movies. So there's a lot less flexibility, but there is a hell of a lot of inspiration. This is the Armies of Lord of the Rings book. It's chock-a-block full of the profiles from the Lord of the Rings films and heaps of effectively what are legendary legions. Army lists tied to certain things, and Rohan has a bucket load. So there is potentially a way to bring Host of Thengel to the tabletop. There are three main candidates for me. The first one with the kind of greatest choice in heroes is Defenders of the Pelennor, which is basically just a huge soup list to represent everyone that was on the Pelennor field. So Aragorn is there, which is perfect for young Aragorn, but he doesn't have a horse, which doesn't make any sense for the Host of Thengel. Then the other two options are proper Rohan lists. Ride Out, which is the big charge out of this here Hornburg, and the Warg-Attack Legion, or the Road to Helm's Deep. And they've both got pros and cons. Aragorn's there, Theoden's there, Gamling's there in all of them, but they definitely don't perfectly capture the same flavor and spirit and flexibility that I was able to with my old alliance. But there's some way that I could bring these models to the tabletop, but I'm just not sure I want to. As I flick through all of these new lists, I'm getting new ideas for new armies, especially the Road to Helm's Deep. The idea of taking Theoden in his pajamas with no big heavy armor, and the Warg-Attack Gimli jumping off the back of Legolas's horse. I'm kind of ready for a new creative journey, and I think the Host of Thengel might be going on the shelf for a display army. It may not get played again, and part of me is really sad about that, and I'm definitely a bit bummed out by the way that the alliance system has changed, but I'm sort of equally inspired. And in life, some things change and some things stay the same, and this is a new chapter for the Middle-earth strategy battle game, and I guess I'm kind of ready to dive in and embrace it. I hope you guys are as excited as I am, and I'm definitely going to get these guys out on the table every now and then, but for now, I think there's a new Rohan journey just around the corner. And don't forget to check out Baron of Dice for all your premium wargaming dice needs. Link down in the description. Use code ZORP at checkout.